state and with the knowledge support from the US-India Business Council, who is represented here by Pushan Das. The consulate is represented by Adrian Pratt, the Public Affairs Officer in the US Consulate General Calcutta. Unfortunately, he's held up somewhere. So and I'm glad to see Jyoti Malhotra, who has kindly agreed to moderate the session today. A warm welcome also to our distinguished panelists, Sanjay Baru, Commodore Sujit Samadna, and Indraneel Banerjee, all of whom are eminent strategic experts with decades of experience thinking and writing about the Indo-Pacific and maritime issues, among others. As we are all aware, with the global pivot to the Indo-Pacific in the past few years, the focus on the region has gained new momentum. Parallelly, over the years, the strategic engagement between India and the US has been on an upwards trajectory. In fact, like two lovebirds, more or less. This is a statement which came out from the US President the other day. It is not without reason that Secretary Blinken, in his visit to New Delhi last year, termed ties with India as one of the most consequential relationships we have with any country on earth. And as I said, just the other day, the President Joe Biden was even a step ahead. Having said that, in the same vein, our India's External Affairs Minister Jaishankar observed in his opening remarks at the 2x2 dialogue that the US-India relationship has grown well beyond its bilateral scope. The two sides are navigating closer cooperation on a range of issues, and the defense relationship is no exception. The nuclear deal, with which Sanjay Baru was closely involved as when he was the media advisor to Dr. Manmohan Singh at that time. India's designation as a major defense partner of the US and strategic convergence in the Indo-Pacific region have taken the defense relationship to new heights. Through this project, we aim at creating awareness about the importance of US-India defense relations, which is voiced by Jyoti in her opening remarks, particularly in the context of contemporary developments in the Indo-Pacific and among our media community. Now, when I say contemporary developments in the Indo-Pacific, this last meeting, which was held in Tokyo, has led to a lot of ripples. And China is trying its own method of reaching out to the community in the region. Now, what we envisage, this is the first of the series of the workshop. It will cover the entire gamut of India-US bilateral defense and strategic relations. The purpose is to act as a capacity-building initiative for young media professionals, and we're going to reach out to the vernacular media as well over time when we will be using Indian languages. And to facilitate a meaningful dialogue to understand how media stakeholders are thinking about defense-related issues. The participants today are primarily media professionals from diverse backgrounds. As Jyoti was announced, we have about 77 registered participants. Now, give and take 25, so we expect at least 50 to be there inside the hall, the virtual hall. Our objective is to ensure that participants have a more informed, better informed view of important defense and strategic matters after attending these sessions, and realize that India-US relationship can be a pillar of stability in an increasingly unsteady and uncertain world, which, as we all know, is now witnessed by the ongoing, never-ending Russia-Ukraine conflict. Just to conclude, I once again welcome everybody in this inaugural workshop and thank the State Department and the Calcutta Consulate and USIBC for their continuous support. And most importantly, I'm very happy to welcome our distinguished set of panelists, and particularly Sanjay Baru, who is also on the board of our Washington DC Center. Looking forward to a productive session, and thank you, Jyoti. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mehta. It's, I think your opening remarks, your welcome remarks have sort of set the stage for this very interesting webinar. I'm a journalist, have been one for several years, and it's wonderful that a lot of my fellow colleagues are here in a virtual hall, if you like, listening to all these very distinguished panelists. But before I welcome the speakers, I'd like to welcome Mr. Pushan Das, who's the India head, aerospace and defense of the US-India Business Council, to deliver his remarks.
Thank you so much, Jyoti. A pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be partnering with CUTS and, of course, the US Consulate in Kolkata on this capacity building initiative. I am not going to pontificate on US-India defense relations too much. I'm looking forward to listening to the panel and reading the outcomes later on. But the whole idea why we did this with CUTS was to promote a meaningful conversation on the US-India defense relationship, and of course, create more informed opinions in the media and beyond it through this initiative. And I know there are a series of workshops through which we plan to achieve that. And I look forward to listening to the deliberations today and the follow-on conference, which is supposed to happen sometime in November. But on behalf of USIBC, welcome to everyone. And I look forward to a fruitful engagement and hope you all participate through the series in the year. Thanks, Jyoti, and over to you. Look forward to the discussions.
Thanks so much, Pushan. I believe Mr. Adrian Pratt, who is the director of the American Center and the Public Affairs Officer of the US Consulate in Kolkata, isn't here yet. He's running a couple of minutes late. So we will start without further ado. But at the risk of promoting myself, may I just say that I've just interviewed Atul Keshav, who's the president of the USIBC, the US India Business Council. So those of you who want to watch the interview on the Prince YouTube channel, please go ahead and do so. It'll also help me promote this interview. So that would be wonderful. But let me introduce very briefly the three very distinguished panelists that we have here today. Dr. Sanjay Baru, a former media advisor of former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. He is now a distinguished fellow at the United Service Institution in New Delhi and a member of the management board of CUTS International Washington, DC Center. Commodore Sujit Samadar, founding member, Society for Aerospace, Maritime and Defense Studies, and former principal director, Naval Plans, and Indraneel Banerjee, a well-known analyst, foreign policy and national security issues. So to come back to the topic of our workshop today, and this is a defense news conclave, if you like, an inaugural workshop on stories of the US-India partnership. The stories in their defense part of the stories of the US-India defense partnership. And like Mr. Pradeep Mehta said, this is a really good moment for us to discuss what's going on in the India-US relationship and why the defense element of it, the defense partnership, is so significant and basically underlies or underpins the India-US relationship. We've just come off the Quad Summit, only the second in-person Quad Summit in Tokyo just a couple of days ago. Prime Minister Modi attended this with the President of the US, Joe Biden, as well as the Prime Ministers of Australia and Japan. And like we all know, President Biden was very fulsome in his comments, not just to the Quad, and he described it as a force of good, but also very, very warm and welcoming of Prime Minister Modi and how India as a fellow democracy can play a role, a stabilizing role in the Indo-Pacific. These last 22 years, actually these last 24 years since the nuclear tests took place in 1998 under Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, former Prime Minister, and we've all seen how the US-India relationship has come such a long way. At the time, after 1998, sanctions kicked in. The Americans imposed severe sanctions on India, but only 2 years later, then US President Bill Clinton came on a visit to India, and the two countries haven't looked back. In 2005, the civil nuclear agreement, the 1-3 agreement, was signed between India and the US. Dr. Baru, I hope, will give us some nuggets, some inside information, stories that haven't perhaps been told publicly before. And in the last decade and a half, what is very, very important is that the India-US relationship, a very important relationship, has the support of all the major parties in India. The ruling party, the BJP today, the Congress party, the the chief party in the opposition. And we've seen over the last 24 years, as I've said, how all parties have supported the growth of the India-US relationship. So to come to you, Dr. Sanjay Baru, if you can give us an understanding of the importance of the Indo-Pacific. Why are we talking of the Indo-Pacific? What is the interaction between the geoeconomics of this region and the strategic importance of it? So give us a sense of what's going on and why the Quad and the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum that's just been set up, how that is linked to all these issues. Dr. Baru.
Thank you very much, Jyoti. Thank you, Pradeep, for inviting me. If you don't mind, let me spend a few minutes speaking about the defense relationship before I focus on the current context of the Indo-Pacific. I would like to make two substantial points which are often not recognized in our conversations on what we call the Indo-US defense relationship or defense cooperation. Since you asked for a nugget, let me begin with a nugget. There was once a delegation of US senators and congressmen who called on Dr. Manmohan Singh. And at the end of the meeting, one of them said to him, "So, Prime Minister, it's going to be 126 for 123. And everybody laughed. And the reference was, of course, to the fact that the US wanted to sell 126 F-16 or F-14, Sujit can correct me on the number, jets to India in exchange for their support for the 123 agreement. So right from the beginning, don't forget, Jyoti, you will remember very well that Condoleezza Rice's visit to India in 2005 preceded the beginning of the conversations of the nuclear deal when the Defense Cooperation Agreement was signed and Pranab Mukherjee went to Washington and met Donald Rumsfeld. So the Defense Cooperation Agreement preceded the nuclear conversation. So the relationship between selling defense equipment to India and strategic cooperation with India was there from day one. And we often forget this, that the so-called defense cooperation is about business and defense. The entire effort has been to increase American share in India's defense purchases, because till 2000, the US was hardly in this business. Almost all our purchases were from Russia, France, Israel, and other European countries. When India joined the WTO in 1991, we see from the data that there was a sharp increase in that decade, thanks to India's opening up, in the trade deficit that India enjoyed vis-a-vis the US. Suddenly the US found that India was selling more to them than they were able to sell to us. And this kind of was counterintuitive. Without WTO and trade liberalization and opening up the Indian economy would help US sell more to India, but actually it ended up with India selling more to the US. So I think around the turn of the century, the US identified defense sales as an important component that would reduce the trade deficit between India and the US. And the entire effort over the last 20 years has been to sell more to India. So so-called, BECA, COMCOSA, all these various things are essentially US government or congressional laws that enable American companies to do business with designated countries. Because the entire business is in the private sector, right? Whether it's Boeing or Lockheed Martin or Pratt Whitney, unlike in the case of Russia or Soviet Union, the defense sector is in the private sector, but the private sector cannot do business with countries unless government gives them permission. So all these various agreements are essential. So let me make the first point I'm making is this is a business relationship. It is a business relationship that is in the garb of a strategic partnership. I think it's very, very important for Indians to understand, because right now we are under pressure to buy less from Russia, buy more from the US. They're all in the same business, France or Sweden or Israel, and we want to also be in the same business. That brings me to the second point, which is that the government of India has fundamentally changed its defense equipment manufacturing acquisitions policy by enunciating the Atmanirbharta Make in India program. If you see the speeches of Defense Minister Rajnath Singh when he was in Washington recently, or Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent speeches, what do they say? They're asking American companies to come and manufacture in India. I'm right now sitting in Hyderabad, which is a good example of a place where, in fact, American companies are manufacturing in India. Lockheed Martin has a base here, Boeing has a base here. So there's some manufacturing going on. But what we seek is more American investment in building India's domestic manufacturing capability so that we become a major defense producer. But when we become a major defense producer, we will not be a major defense importer. So this import relationship will actually decline with time. So I think these are the two background points I wanted to make, since this whole series is about conveying to the Indian people this nature of this. It's a business relationship. Do not confuse it with strategic partnership. Now that brings us to the Indo-Pacific. Now, I have been concerned that so much of US focus has been only on the Indo-Pacific, not enough on South Asia. Because India has two problems. It has a problem called Pakistan and a problem called China. And Pakistan doesn't figure in the Indo-Pacific. So the US sells to Pakistan, has been selling to Pakistan. So my question, is if it is not just a defense business relationship, if it's a strategic partnership, then why only focus on the Indo-Pacific? Why not look at a wider gamut of relationships? After all, the US recently walked out of Afghanistan without telling us. And that has huge security implications for India. So I do think that a conversation that the Cuts is beginning and all of you are beginning should engage in these issues, whether the strategic relationship between India and the US is a much wider canvas that addresses all our security concerns, or only focused on China. Because Indo-Pacific is not only about China. Finally, to come to your question, Jyoti, about the recent Quad meeting, etc. Quad took birth in December 2004 when a tsunami hit the Indian Ocean region, and India, Sri Lanka, India, United States, Indonesia, we all cooperated in dealing with that tsunami, and found HADR, humanitarian and disaster relief, as an extremely useful way in which to cooperate. Quad continues to focus on some of these issues, whether it's COVID or other regional security issues. IPEF is a pie in the sky, as I have repeatedly said. We have to wait and watch what it is. It is not a trade relationship. It's not about trade. What it is about is not yet very clear. I think, as somebody recently said, it follows the Hindu philosophy of neti, neti, neti. We know what it is not. We still do not know what it is, so therefore it's premature to talk about IPF. So let me stop here, because I think you have a round two where I can pick up some of the issues that those who are more au fait with these points, maybe I've overstated my case. But I will end by saying that let us not confuse between a business and a trading relationship and a strategic relationship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baru. As expected, it's full Paisa Vasool listening to you, because I think the perspective in which you put the Indo-US relationship and the fact that you talk about how there is a garb of a strategic framework to what is purely an economic, or not just purely an economic question, but I think some questions will come to you in round two, and I have several of those. But may I now invite Commodore Sujit Samadar, the founding member for the Society of Aerospace, Maritime and Defense Studies, to deliver your remarks.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity of sharing some views. Maybe some of it might be a little contrarian, but I will stick my neck out and say what I have in mind, because I think this is an opportunity not to be missed. So thank you again for this little presentation. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to belabor too much on the importance of the Indo-Pacific. That's already embedded in everybody's mind. We know that it is 65% of world GDP, 63% of global population, 50% of global trade, blah, 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 blah. So all that is significantly important, as long as as everything is freedom of navigation and overflight goes on, access to commodities, markets, and minerals are available to all at market-driven sort of mechanisms, and not commanded by one country or the other. I think where we need to also see is what's going to happen to this world in another 25 years from now. And there are lots of studies which have been done on it. There's stuff on global warming, climate change, and all, which is again familiar to all of you. But there are 2 or 3 things that I want to touch upon. One, the population is going to be about 9 billion people. Our annual consumption of material is going to grow up from 79 gigatons to 167 gigatons by 2060. Energy will cross to 24 gigatons. And these are all scarce resources. So whilst we hope that all this will be market driven and conducted in a gentlemanly sort of way, but hope is never a great strategy as far as geopolitics is concerned. So we need to be prepared mentally for contest, and we hope that there won't be conflict in this whole issue. Now, for many years, the Indian Ocean was actually the soft underbelly of the Chinese. In 1962, whilst the other 2 services might say they were not quite potent, but the Indian Navy was already operating an Indian aircraft carrier. We had 2 huge cruisers, we had several destroyers, and we had a highly reckonable force in the Indian Ocean region in 1962. But today in 2022, the equation has dramatically changed. The Chinese are able to put at least 2 aircraft carrier group into India, into the Indian Ocean region, 30 to 40 destroyers, several dozens of submarines, at least 7 to 8 nuclear submarines in this very region. And this total force of the Chinese deployments, after allowing for their strategies of anti-access and anti-denial to protect the Pacific coast, is not equal to what the Quad can put. The Quad is significantly weaker to just a fraction of the Indian of the PLA Navy in 2026. That's 4 years from now. So this is extremely significant. So of course, they also have huge capacities in building ships. I mean, they can make, and some numbers are phenomenal. They made 12 nuclear submarines in 15 years. They make, 6 destroyers a year. We made 6 destroyers in 20 years, maybe. So, these are numbers that should alert us to how the geopolitics of this region are changing. Add to that, the huge amount. Yesterday, I was in a space conference as a subject that I follow intimately. The Chinese capabilities in space is no longer near peer. They're far ahead of the US in terms of certain capabilities, particularly in position navigation and timing systems, in terms of being able to disrupt space-based ISR and all of that. So now what I'm coming to is that, whilst the Chinese may be doing whatever they're doing, but in the long term, we will see the Indian Ocean region, for the factors that I mentioned, quite crowded with a lot of force deployments from across different countries, and quite distant from their home ports and bases. So in the next, in this section, I want to put together 1 or 2 ideas and then carry forward these ideas into the next opportunity that we get. So when you look at these deployments here, we have to understand that there's no place to, provide recreation, replenishment, repair and refit of these maritime forces between Bahrain and Singapore, at the very least, if not right up to Yokosuka. So one of the proposals that I had just published a couple of days ago was to look at a Quad initiative to locate a facility in India as per the Quad 1 summit declarations in terms of technology and financial collaboration, and under the IPEF, to set up a facility in India where Quad plus navies and maritime forces can be repaired, refitted, replenished, and recreation facilities provided to the sailors. This is a long-term investment. When the chips come down, there are going to be ships which will be damaged. There will be people who will die. There will be requirements of replenishment of fuel, munitions, etc. And at that time, when that is happening, it's too late to start thinking of all these things. So there's a first recommendation that I have, that for Indo-Defense cooperation, such a facility should be begin to be thought of. It's not going to be easy to make. Locating it on the Arabian seaboard, Western seaboard would be the best option. We have a shipyard there, needs to be ramped up, and that can be done. But in my view, such a facility is going to be required so that an aircraft carrier can be docked there for repairs, replenishment, and all those other things I spoke about. The second part of the story on Indo-defense relations is, as Dr. Sanjay Baru very correctly pointed out, it's a lot depending on only businesses. So, in the last few years, we've done a lot of business with the United States. And as you mentioned, in my job as the principal director naval plans, I did the first FMS with the US for the old amphibian ship called the USS Trenton, which has done some great service for us. 2006, and they said that we'll not be able to sail her for more than 5 years. We have now sailed her for 16, and she's doing good. So that was the first deal which was done under the foreign military sales route. And since then, we have seen a flood of, let's say, acquisitions: the Pachets, the Chinook, the C-17, the C-130, the P-8Is. From there, the M777 howitzer, which is doing some great service in Ukraine. So there has been a lot of this. But finally, where we'll have to go to is a much larger agenda, and not just about ectopic sales and sort of ephemeral collaboration to make something here and there, but a larger game. So in that larger game, two areas that seem to be missed out, and I'm going to stick my neck to say out, is just like what's happened in Australia, where there's been a clear shift from conventional submarines to nuclear submarines, including dumping the French for the deal, which did not sort of gain too much favor with the French after they had sunk $80 billion into the project, and they actually collaborated on a nuclear program in Australia. Our nuclear submarine program is still very much hinged on Russian and Indian sort of designs, but everybody knows the US nuclear submarine capability is very good, and this is something that we should explore. I'm talking about SSNs, not ballistic missile and all those nasty stuff. So that's one. The second area is clearly the aircraft carrier. Nobody's got more experience in building aircraft carriers than the US have got. We have just built our first one. It has taken us 18 years to make that. 18 years to make that. The Chinese make an aircraft carrier every 5 or 6 years. So we have lots of headspace to grow together in the business of making aircraft carriers. And certainly, if the Indian role in the Indo-Pacific has to continue, then these two elements of maritime forces is a given: nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers, together with the aircraft that fly on it, the helicopters that fly on it, and all this meshed up together with the space-based systems, on which some agreement has now been done. There's also a very positive sign on the IPAF, and that I don't think we should miss that point. And this is exactly what the Chinese had done earlier, that they have now offered hundreds of scholarships for Indian students to go to the US and learn from them. If you follow the kind of technical papers which I read today on various technical subjects, it's very difficult to find a single paper which doesn't have a Chinese in it. And I'm talking about very nice papers on artificial intelligence, on blockchain, on materials, you name it. They're all coming from US universities. But there's a Chinese name attached to it, maybe two. We also have some Indian people who are very good on issues on communications, on satellite configurations, on warship building and material on the other side. But so therefore, the overall, I just want to rest my case here with the last 2 minutes. First and foremost is this defense technical collaboration. Defense collaboration cannot be just limited to doing Malabar exercises once every year, and we think that we'll become interoperable and we'll have bonhomie and all of that. It doesn't take you very much far. I've done these exercises. We wave at each other, do a couple of routine exercises, do some complex exercises, but it's only up to a certain level. But real collaboration comes in hardware exchanges, and that's where both sides of the nation must share hardware. Indian stuff must go into US ships. US stuff can come into Indian ships, and that's exactly what Dr. Baru had said. And what Prime Minister Modi had said: "Make in India for the world." Unfortunately, that the "for the world" part got missed out when he spoke about it in the first time from the Red Fort. It was "Make in India for the world." From submarines to satellite, that "Make in India for the world," that sort of thing. If you hear it closely. So this is the first part. The second part, when I have a chance to intervene, I would like to bring in other issues where India defense collaboration is not only a purely military sort of thing, but it has to address a much larger canvas which spans across mankind's interests, not just the narrow geopolitical stuff that we are talking about. If there's an opportunity, I'll spend some time on that to talk about what are those other issues on which we can genuinely be the force for good, as has been expounded, rather than being this muscular chap trying to bash up everybody who's entering the Indian Ocean region. There are many good things that such collaborations can achieve. And I don't think we should forget that. That I will leave it for the second intervention, if that's possible, as per your schedule. So I rest my case here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commodore Samadar. I think those are fascinating opening remarks. And yes, we will wait for your subsequent comments in round 2. But may I now invite Indranil Banerjee, analyst in foreign policy and national security issues, to deliver his remarks. And Indranil, perhaps if I can ask you to also put into perspective Russia with the Indo-Pacific and especially the ongoing geopolitical ferment that we are witnessing today.
Thank you, Jyoti. Can you hear me clearly?
Very well, thank you. And before you start, Indranil, just just a reminder to all the participants, but to my fellow journalists who are in another virtual hall, please do post your questions to the speakers. You can send them to me in the chat box, and then I will ask the speakers. Go ahead, Indranil.
Yeah, I'll talk about this Russia thing in the next one.
Okay.
I just thought, as an analyst, I'll give my perceptions on this whole Quad thing, because there are a lot of the whole idea about this endeavor by Kutz is to reach out to media people and academics and so on.
Absolutely.
So let's just give a very simple kind of overview of this whole thing and what it is all about. From an analyst perspective, I'm not privy to any special privileged information, nor am I connected with any of the officials who constitute policy. So looking at it from an analyst point of view, what is it? And why is it important to us today? And I'm not very good at extempo, so I'll just read out from a little note that I've made. Now, I think the first thing that we should understand is the Galwan incident of June 2020. That's what changed. It was a turning point for India. The ambiguity was gone after June 2020. China is enemy number one. Earlier, it was a potential threat. There were all kinds of views on how one should deal with China. But after June 2020, it was absolutely clear. And as far as India was concerned, China became a core concern. And since then, the government of India has taken several steps to deal with this threat at the military, economic, and diplomatic levels. The renewed engagement with Quad and its increased importance has to be seen in this perspective. India earlier was somewhat ambiguous about the Quad because of the ambiguity in its relationship with China. That was the important thing. They didn't know how to balance this thing. Today, there is no need to balance it. Now, but as far as the kind of inputs that I get, there is still residual skepticism about what the Quad is really about and what its worth is. India does not need membership of another ladies' club where high-pollutant ideas of shared democratic values, world peace, or climate change could be discussed. Nor is it frightfully keen on shows to frighten pirates and other terrorists. It is in the Quad principally because of its military problems with China. This is the bottom line, whether it is stated or unstated. Now, India does not realistically expect any of the Quad members to get militarily involved in any future conflict, God forbid, if there is one. Nor does it expect the Quad to become another NATO or a formal military alliance. Yet, if the Quad is to be of some practical worth, it must help India's strategic stance vis-a-vis China, and that too in very practical terms. And as Dr. Sanjay Baru pointed out very clearly, we don't need the Quad for bilateral stuff with the United States, to buy weapons or to transfer technology. That's a bilateral thing. It's been going on since for years, as Dr. Baru mentioned, and it can continue. So what is it that India is looking for in the Quad, from the little sense that I can make of it? And I'll restrict my remarks to the maritime sphere because that's what Kutz wanted me to do. Now, as far as we are concerned, the entry of Chinese forces into the IOR is a game changer, especially their nuclear submarines coming into the IOR. Now that changes the whole strategic chessboard as far as India is concerned. And the building up of strategic bases, their increasing force levels, et cetera, and as the Commodore mentioned, that's huge, and we are really nowhere. Our Navy is absolutely in no position to counter that threat, and forget about projecting force into the South China Sea or any other place. So I think the current problem of India's maritime security is twofold. The first is the matter of capabilities. We need more ships and technology. Production levels are totally inadequate to meet even our current projected levels. And this is recognized that this is a problem of the long term. Now, India needs help in 3 areas. Purchase of naval weapons, systems, and technologies, which could be done on the bilateral front, no need to come to the Quad. Assistance to boost capacities in the indigenous production of naval systems and transfer of technologies, again, which is, you don't really need a Quad for that. You can do it through bilateral means. And here, as everybody knows, the US has been sensitive to some extent to our needs, and they've given us Boeing's, the P-8Is, long-range maritime patrol aircraft. We're getting Seahawk, we're getting the Lockheed Martin Seahawk anti-submarine helicopters and so on. But we don't really need the Quad for all of these. We can get it directly from the US. So what do we really need? We need practical help, say like, if there is hostilities with China, will we get practical help to track, target, and destroy Chinese weapons platforms, air assets, and bases? That, in my view, is where the real utility of the Quad could come in. And it is practical, it is possible. And this is something which the Chinese fear. They don't fear highfalutin talk. They are not bothered. But when like in this Tokyo summit, the Americans came up with this idea about, they said that let's have a Indo-Pacific partnership for maritime domain awareness. Now that was a practical thing. And yesterday, or day before yesterday, the Chinese government said, okay, we're going to stop, fishing in the North IOR. So you can see that there was a direct response to some practical measure announced by the Quad. Now that is the kind of stuff that we really need. I don't know how many minutes I've spoken, but I think that unless we can get practical stuff, practical mechanisms into this Quad thing, it's going to be of limited value. And frankly, in India, while of course, there's some diplomatic value also in having such a formation, from the strategic point of view, it's going to be of low-level importance. Thank you.
Thank you, Indranil. Fascinating remarks, with one exception, that your usage of the phrase ladies club, which I completely disagree with, because first of all, it's not just sexist, it's also pejorative. So I'm going to ask
my apologies.
I'm glad you're making a public apology, because let's say that some of the strongest people in India have been women and continue and are women today, including your wonderful moderator, may I ask, but let's move on from here. I'm also happy to welcome Adrian Pratt. He's joined us. Adrian is the director of the American Center and the public affairs officer of the US consulate in Kolkata. Adrian, could you put on your video, please? Okay. Sandra, is Adrian here? I was just informed on my chat box that he's here. He's not. All right. So when he does join, I'll introduce him again. Dr. Baru, can I come back to you and perhaps ask you to expound on some of your earlier remarks? But really, I would like you to talk a little bit about what's happening with the Russian invasion of Ukraine 3 months on, and how do you think that interacts with this conception of the Indo-Pacific and India's participation in the Quad? You know, you mentioned earlier about India's dependence on Russian defense and ammunition, about 65% or so today. So this diversification that India is attempting, buying defense equipment from the US, and today I believe India buys about $3.2 billion worth of defense arms and equipment. So can you talk to us a little bit about that, and perhaps your other remarks? Can't hear.
Sorry. I think the real issue today, first of all, let me say that I enjoyed listening to both my co-panelists and share with them many of their perspectives. But let me, in response to your question, say that from whatever I understand from the statements of the Indian Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister, we are today in a fundamentally new business as far as India is concerned, where we are saying make in India, manufacture in India, make in India and make for the world is the government's policy with respect to defense equipment. So it's not just about reducing, imports from Russia and increasing imports from America. That's no longer the game.
Right.
The game is who will come and manufacture in India. This is my understanding of the various statements of the government. Right? Now, if that's the new game in town, who is willing to play that game with India? Who is willing to manufacture in India for the Indian market, but also for the international market? It changes the game. It changes the game fundamentally. Because as long as we were in a market where we were simply importing, then the competition was between exporters. So from, as I mentioned, if you look at the numbers, from 2000 onwards, and particularly after the 2005 India-US Defense Cooperation Agreement, there was a sharp increase in sales of defense equipment from the United States to India, and a decline in the purchases from Russia. So, you look at the world market, I mean, it can be any commodity. It can be soap, it can be toothpaste. There are two manufacturers, there's Russia, there's US. They're competing. India is one of the major buyers. I think for many years, we're the number one buyers. Right now, we're probably again a number one buyer, but we're at the top of the pile of the consumers, right? Along with Saudi Arabia and a couple of others. So here we are, the buyers, and these two are the sellers, and they're fighting with each other to sell more to us. And we are under pressure to buy less from Russia. So since you asked about Ukraine, Ukraine has nothing to do with India. This is a European geopolitical struggle going on. But the Ukraine war has been used to impose sanctions that affect India, because the effort is to use the Ukraine war and generate anti-Russian sentiment so that there is greater willingness in India to buy from Western countries and less from Russia. And Russia's capacity to sell also is going down as a consequence of the war. So in other words, Russia will be less and less important as a supplier, and America hopes to be more and more important. Now that game could have gone on if we were in the old paradigm, right? If we are still the importers, the net importers, and are looking at who can supply, there's France, there's Israel, etc. But if the new game, and I take the word of the defense minister and the prime minister at face value, if they really are serious about Atmanirbharta, about Make in India, and are telling everybody, come manufacture in India, don't just sell to India, then we are in a different game. So the whole paradigm of India-US defense cooperation has to be re-examined in this context, whether it's submarines, whether it's aircraft carriers, whether it's helicopters, whether it's missiles, whatever it is the US willing to come and manufacture in India? Are we willing to do joint research? I mean, we talked about joint manufacturing, joint research. joint research. I know a bit about joint research. The fact is that the entire strategic research domain in the US is tremendous. There are firewalls. Just finding Chinese names, Indian names doesn't make any difference. I mean, we had an Indian name coming and warning us about sanctions, a chap called Dalip Singh, right? So and you have a Chinese name doing USTR negotiations, a lady called Catherine Tai. Don't go by names, they're all Americans. And they're all highly security cleared Americans in a strategic space. Now, we in India are asking for cooperation, joint research, joint manufacturing. That means we want to penetrate that wall of secrecy. Is the US willing? That's my question as an Indian. Are you willing to work with me in areas of high tech? We started talking about high tech cooperation in 2000 when President Clinton came here, right? And that was when Ken Jester was the undersecretary for the high time. The chap was ambassador here. He used to be undersecretary in Washington, in Pentagon. I've attended meetings with him in Washington as a journalist in those days. So we've been talking about high tech. Now, how much real joint research is going on? Are we doing it? If we are doing it, it's very good. How many technologies has the United States transferred to India in the last 20 years? Has anybody got a list? I'm asking. I've tried to do my net research sitting in Hyderabad to see. I don't have any data in the public domain. So if somebody has data, let me know. So what is this cooperation?
Can I interrupt you, Dr. Baru? I think when India becomes a major defense partner of the US, perhaps, I mean, at least in theory, India does get access to dual-use technologies. And so I'm not sure what are
no. So Jyoti, my question is, what are those technologies that we have already got access to?
Right.
I want an answer to that. From any journalist, any researcher, Indian, American, answer that question.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. Commodore Samadar, would you like to take on Dr. Baru's question? And, and if you could, just a few minutes of your second round.
Yeah, just a few minutes. But before that, I just want to say one very important point which Mr. Banerjee brought out about the purpose of the squad. My sense in this whole thing about collaboration, you need to go back and see what was said in the Quad Summit 1. There's a whole session devoted to critical technologies, and a way forward was clearly charted in terms of, there'll be a Quad statement of principles, there'll be technical standards contact groups, there'll be semiconductor, in which India has already moved forward, 5G deployments and how that will be handled, etc. But in business, since after my job in the Navy, I spent several years running companies, so I understand business a bit. But there is no business case at the moment to make 3 submarines or 2 guns and all of that. Where you need to do proper businesses, as Dr. Baru also mentioned, is that we must have the scale, scope, and size. Only then there's a business case for investments into India. And there's a business case for transfer of technology. And there are substantial technologies which we in India have, which we can also transfer to other people, particularly on space-related issues and some of that. So the first principle of the Quad is that if it has to give any economic slant to it, as I mentioned to you, one was the creation of this joint infrastructure, which is derived from the Quad 1 meeting of a shipping facility which does all those 4 Rs, as I call it. And the second is also commonalities that we need. For example, minesweepers. The Australians, US, Japan, India, all of us need minesweepers. We've been trying to buy minesweepers since 2004. We don't have a single minesweeper in our country. But suppose the four countries get together and make a business case for making a shared co-production on co-design and co-development of minesweepers. And that's not some 10 minesweepers, that's 60 minesweepers on a perpetual basis. You've got a business case for transferring hell of a lot of good technologies into India, whether it's remotely operated underwater vessels, side scan sonars, all of that. It's a very scientific thing. Similarly, as I mentioned to you about submarines, the Australians are building submarines, the Americans are building submarines, Japan is building submarines, Indians are also building submarines. Now, if we can agree on a common design, on a common platform and whatever common everything else, just remember our unit cost will come down so much drastically. We're not all inventing the wheel. The investment that is required to design a conventional submarine is upwards of $2.5 billion, at least. So, you now amortize it over 4 countries, you create the scale, you develop the entire supply chain, and we are in great business between us. So, so the Quad cannot be looked at in a narrow sort of, let's do exercises together, let's wave our hats at each other, raise flags. That's all very good. But if you have to do proper business in Quad, then scale, scope, and size has to be brought in, where there are commonalities in thought process in terms of what we've done together. I've given you 2 projects. The Minesweeper is a great project. The submarine development plan, which is common to all the 3 countries, 4 countries, is a good project. And I may also stick my neck out and say there's a hell of a lot we can do in space, including and we saw some great done work which has already been collaborated between the 2 countries on space on space collaboration, and we are a recognizable space force. We have great technologies in space, and we have some of the smartest startups in space today. That's also part of overall defense collaboration, because it percolates onto benefits which is larger than the defense ecosystem. Space is no longer a defense thing. It can impact commodities trading. It can impact insurance. It can impact freight. It can impact the entire global energy structure by using space technologies. That is a strength that Quad can bring in. All this sort of stuff that we are doing is, very minor, but demand aggregation, pipeline production models, long-term supply chains, shared development costs. These are the things that we need to work on, where we can aggregate the total businesses of these 4 countries, and let's see who can stop us. We have got strengths. Everybody's got strength. Let's bring it all together. My last point here is that apart from being this, sort of military sort of thing, the Quad has also a huge amount of role in addressing these challenges that is ahead of mankind today. Climate change, global warming, IW fishing. We got there's no fish left in the South China Sea. We cannot have oysters in Goa anymore because that's polluted. Almost 78,000 tons of Indian tuna is caught illegally. Our sea reefs have gone, our seagrass is gone, the ocean's acidification is taking place. These are the sort of things that the Quad should raise and push it to the G20 in the next summit next year, where the Quad should say, look, we are the Quad and we believe that our role is much larger than, fending off the Chinese or some Russians or something. Our role is to save mankind.
Yeah.
And that is coming from the oceans today. That's the maritime sphere of it. In every negotiation that we have on climate change, there's one party which is missing. And that one party is the oceans. Let Quad be the oceans petitioner to mankind. This is a project that SAMDIS is doing, and I'd really love to involve more people on this. We are drafting a petition on behalf of the oceans to mankind.
Right.
Stop exploiting us. Stop exploiting the oceans. Be careful with it, because you are seeing the damage that you have created by upsetting ocean streams. So I think the Quad is not just a narrow military sort of security construct. It can be a very, very useful force to save mankind, not just some Chinese and Russians and all that. I would like to see a vision of Quad which is along these lines. I'll be very happy to work on those sort of issues. Sorry if I've been a little passionate on this.
No, I think that's great. We all need passion. So, it's not just...
Sorry for that, but I'm extremely passionate about oceans and how it is impacting us. And I truly believe from the bottom of my heart that the Quad can make that change. There's no other stronger configuration in the world than the Quad. It's a close thing. We don't want to make it Quad plus 100 and all that. Forget it. Let's just be the Quad and let's work on this. We can do these things. We can be the maintainer of peace. Minesweepers are good. Tomorrow, if our ships are bottled up, who's going to trade with us?
Right.
There's no minerals. All our hydrocarbons are stuck. And in 3 days, we'll be like Sri Lanka. No fuel, no food grain, no fertilizer, all port shut. So, let's try and do these things. And this is what the role of the Quad should be. And this is all there in the Quad 1 summit.
Right, right.
And so
thank you for your passion, Commodore. I think it's wonderful to hear these remarks of the Quad, not just as a force for good, but as a force for global good, I think. But may I welcome Adrian Pratt. We've missed you, Adrian. Adrian, as you all know, is the director of the American Center, as well as Public Affairs Officer at the US Consulate in Kolkata, and very much responsible for putting this particular webinar, as well as a series of workshops on the India-US Defense Partnership, the Defense Conclave together. Adrian, would you like to say a few words?
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize profusely for being late. It's been a series of unfortunate events here. My son is joining us here in Kolkata for the first time, and we had a little difficulty at the airport. So immensely sorry that I'm late. Thank you all for being here. I don't know, Jyoti, if this is when you want me to make my remarks, or
please do. Yes, go ahead.
Okay,
yeah.
Brilliant. Well, as I said, I'm really delighted to be here this morning.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
It is an honor for me to speak to all of you this morning as we initiate the series of virtual sessions of one of our key grants projects, titled, as you know, Defense News Conclave, Stories of US-India Defense Partnership. And really, what a great time to tell the key stories of the US-India relationship. This year is indeed a momentous year for the US's relationship with the nation of India, and in fact with the city of Kolkata. The United States and India are celebrating the 75th anniversary of our country's diplomatic relations, and 2022 marks the 230th anniversary of Benjamin Joy being nominated by George Washington as the first US consul to Kolkata in 1792. So we got a busy year of milestones to mark. As the world's oldest democracies, our countries have always have something to learn from each other. Our people-to-people ties are at the heart of our constructive partnership. Although we're based here in Kolkata, our consular district is huge and incredibly diverse, with 5 international borders, and engagement by the US consulate reaches the remotest corners of the region, which includes 11 of the states across East and Northeast India. Our work includes preventing trafficking in persons, promoting women's entrepreneurship, supporting minority rights, promoting US higher education, providing English language and leadership programs for youth, and forging trade, economic, security, and cultural connections in the Indo-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific region is crucial to US foreign policy objectives. Secretary Blinken, in his remarks on a free and open Indo-Pacific, said, quote, "The Indo-Pacific region will shape the trajectory of the world in the 21st century. It is the fastest growing region on the planet. It accounts for 60% of the world economy and 2/3 of all economic growth over the last 5 years. It is home to more than half the world's people and many of the world's largest economies. The United States recognizes that much of our planet's future will be written in the Indo-Pacific. Our enduring commitment to this region and our collaboration with our allies and partners will help us to achieve a free and open, interconnected, prosperous, resilient, and secure region for all," end quote. And India is our strong ally in the Indo-Pacific. President Biden, launching the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity in Japan last week, has made it clear that, quote, "The future of the 21st century economy is going to be largely written in the Indo-Pacific in our region. We're writing the new rules for the 21st century economy that are going to help all of our countries' economies grow faster and fairer. We'll do that by taking on some of the most acute challenges that drag down growth and by maximizing the potential of our strongest growth engines," end quote. And India is one of our most trusted partners in the region. On April 11, Secretary of State Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin III welcomed Minister of Defense Singh and Minister of External Affairs Dr. Jaishankar to Washington for the 4th US-India 2+2 ministerial dialogue. The dialogue was preceded by a virtual meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. I would like to read a short excerpt from the 57-paragraph joint statement that we released. And it won't be 57 paragraphs, it will be a very short summation of what was said. Quote, as natural and trusted partners celebrating 75 years of diplomatic relations between the United States and independent India, with a shared commitment to democracy and pluralism, a multifaceted bilateral agenda, and growing convergence of strategic interests, both countries seek to continue to promote a resilient, rules-based international order that safeguards sovereignty and territorial integrity, upholds democratic values, and promotes peace and prosperity for all, end quote. It continues, quote, the ministers reaffirmed the importance of the US-India Comprehensive Global Strategic Partnership to international peace and security, end quote. This was a really strong statement reflective of the importance of our bilateral relationship and partnership. Cooperation with India strengthens our security, bolsters our prosperity, and enriches our society. An enormous range of Americans have a stake in the US-India relationship and expect further progress in achieving the full potential of US-India ties. In fact, the world depends on US-India cooperation to address global challenges such as pandemics, the climate crisis that we were just talking about, cyber threats, supply chain resiliency, and terrorism. This is particularly true in the Indo-Pacific, where the United States and India are working with Quad partners. As the world's largest democracies, the United States and India have a special responsibility to advance democracy, multilateral institutions, inclusive development, and human rights in the world. We know that democracy is essential to meeting the challenges of our changing world. The US-India relationship today spans the scope of human endeavor from sea to space, from security to health, and from energy to education. One key element of our strategy is realizing the full potential of our major defense partner ties and supporting India's role as a net security provider in the Indo-Pacific. And through this project with our partner CUTS International think tank, we want to tell the story to our audiences in India and beyond. Working together to strengthen our military, diplomatic, and disaster response capabilities will ensure the US-India partnership is a force for global good, as will expanding the interoperability of our forces through training, exercises, and planning. These topics were discussed extensively at the 2+2 in April. In that meeting, the secretaries and ministers commended the significant and continuing progress in the US-India major defense partnership. Drawing on the momentum from the US-India Defense Policy Group meeting in October 2021, the secretaries and ministers reaffirmed their ambitions for building an advanced and comprehensive defense partnership in which the US and Indian militaries coordinate closely together across all domains. The ministers acknowledged the importance of deepening collaboration in science and technology in the US-India Joint Technical Group, the JTG, and in evolving new defense domains, including space, artificial intelligence, and cyber. The ministers underscored the importance of cooperation in space and welcomed plans to conduct an inaugural defense space dialogue later this year. As information sharing forms an important pillar of the US-India defense cooperation, the ministers underlined the importance of building a comprehensive framework under which our militaries are equipped to exchange information in real time across domains. Acknowledging that our navies have been a driving force in advancing the United States and India's shared interests in the Indian Ocean region and the wider Indo-Pacific, the ministers discussed opportunities to further advance and deepen maritime cooperation, including in underwater domain awareness. Recognizing the importance of building robust private industry collaboration, the ministers welcomed ongoing projects under the auspices of the US-India Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, DTTI, including a project agreement to co-develop air-launched unmanned aerial vehicles. Seeking trusted and resilient defense supply chains, the minister welcomed the progress made towards implementation of the Industrial Security Agreement to facilitate collaboration on cutting-edge defense technologies between industries. Acknowledging India's focus on developing its domestic capabilities and helping to ensure reliable defense supplies, the ministers committed to work closely across their respective governments on co-production, co-development, cooperative testing, and advanced systems, investment promotion, and the development of maintenance, repair, and overhaul facilities in India. To further enhance defense industrial cooperation in the naval sector, both sides agreed to explore the possibilities of using Indian shipyards for repair and maintenance of ships of the US Maritime Swift Command to support mid-voyage repair of US naval ships. Managing our defense and law enforcement activities through these two goals keeps all our citizens, young and old, regardless of religion or political party, safe from crime. It reduces the risks from terrorism and protects us from the threat of war. We must stand together in this moment when autocracies are threatening to undercut the system of rules that the United States, India, and other democracies have built to support freedom. We must continue to defend against and deter those who threaten their neighbors and undermine the rule of law. With this hope, let me end here and pass it back to you. And I do, again, apologize for joining late, but I'm looking forward very much to listening to the rest of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adrian, for your remarks. And may I now ask Indranil Banerjee. Indro, if you can, if you'd like to perhaps comment on what Adrian has said, about the Quad, also particularly on the India-US defense ties, and your own remarks in the second round of this intervention.
Sure, Jyoti. First of all, let's be absolutely clear, there's very little, if no disagreement on this whole issue about India, the importance of India's relationship with the United States. I mean, there's consensus at all levels today. There is no issue with that per se. Having said that, there, however, is a degree of strategic misalignment between the United States and other Quad partners. Our view of Asian security clearly differs from theirs on many counts. More fundamentally, perhaps, is our status quoist worldview, which frowns on any attempt to radically alter the balance of power in the continent. The destruction of Iraq, Syria by Western powers was not endorsed by India. Neither has the policy shifts in Afghanistan. The Western powers' reliance on rogue partners such as Pakistan and Turkey is another area of worry. It continues to be an area of worry. The decision by the United States to prime the Ukrainian leadership to take up a hardline position against Russia and openly try to alter the status quo by attempting to include Ukraine in NATO has not been welcomed. The resultant war by Russia has proven to be disastrous for India in practical terms, not to speak of in diplomatic terms. We've been pushed into a position which we didn't want to take, and it doesn't help us. On China, too, there is a degree of ambiguity and a continued economic dependence of a very large order, of a very fundamental order, I might add. The main and perhaps the only area of agreement is China, that it is a threat to Asian and perhaps the global order. So this is the bigger picture, and we cannot run away from it, much as we'd love to. This relationship with the United States is very important, very desirable. We have people-to-people ties, and there's no way that we're going to go back on it. It's terribly important for us as well, and we'd like to take it forward. And the Quad is a great idea, I think, and especially if we can do practical things with it, some of the stuff which the gentleman from the US consulate suggested. And I think on India's part, we need to be much more open. We hold back too much, on whether opening up our ports and this and that. We have such a lot of reservations on this front. But coming back to the Quad, so we should not miss out the larger picture and this problem of disagreements that we continue to have. And perhaps that at one level does, pull back this whole initiative. So at some level, within the Indian leadership, there is a degree of skepticism. I'm not aware of what level it is because I'm not privy to these matters. So if it is not going to produce very practical results, the leadership will not expend too much energy on it. For India, it will remain a diplomatic asset of some but limited value as long as its military potential remains unfulfilled. And also, of course, the economic aspect of this military thing. As the Commodore said, we need production facilities and great ideas. Let's manufacture together. I mean, his idea of joint production of minesweepers and submarines is just fantastic, I think. And on the other hand, as long as it doesn't have practical value, China too is not going to be impressed. And as far as India is concerned, the Quad will not be a deterrent, as continued events have proved. However, if the moment some practical suggestions are made, like the one made in this Tokyo summit when they talked about, interdicting dark ships and illegal fishing in the Indian Ocean region, immediately there was a Chinese response. As I mentioned earlier, day before yesterday, the government in China said we are going to, stop this fishing in the North Indian Ocean.
Just a few more seconds, please, Indranil.
Okay. So China is aware that the Quad has the potential to become a future threat, and that is why it keeps slamming it at every opportunity. Now, the question, of course, is, will that potential get actualized? And of course, we'd all like it to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Indranil. I have a few questions in my chat box. So I'm going to ask the various speakers. Biju Gopinathan Unithan, he is the chief sub-editor of Mathrubhumi Daily, a newspaper in Kerala. To you, Dr. Baru, the question is it necessary to, or should the Quad be expanded to other nations in the Arabian Sea to check the threat from Pakistan?
If India cannot solve the Pakistan problem on its own, I mean, we have no right to exist as a nation. So we don't need another country to work for and deal with Pakistan. Pakistan is a purely bilateral problem for us. It is entirely possible to solve that problem if there is political will. I worked for a prime minister who tried to solve that problem, and I'm fully aware that the problem is solvable. But it is linked up with domestic politics of both countries. It is not a military issue. It's not a diplomatic issue. So forget Pakistan. Quad is about the Indo-Pacific. It is about dealing with the world's second most powerful country today, a trading superpower, a major nation, that is China. So, we in India should have some sense of proportion when we look at what are the challenges we face. Pakistan is not a challenge that requires us to work with anybody else.
Okay, thank you. To you, Commodore Samadar. Again, there's the same question, another question from Biju. China is ahead in cordoning off the Quad by expanding its own strategic bases, including in the Arabian Sea. So how far is India capable, and what should be done to address our concerns?
Yeah, good. So, first of all, as I said, the Indian Navy was at one time a very powerful force in this region, but today it's the strength for various reasons is at 140 ships. The Chinese are at 450 ships. So that said, our geography gives us a lot of advantages. We have two sort of land-based aircraft carriers in Andaman and Nicobar Islands and in the Lakshadweep, where we can do a lot of launching of operations. But certainly they are worrisome. And today, the Indian Navy certainly has a capability of tracking every ship which enters this area. We know that. We have it completely with us. So every time there's a ship or even a fishing vessel which enters the area of concern, they are monitored and tracked. Opening up various bases with of the Chinese in different parts of other oceans in India. I think the Indian Navy also has very good facilities. I think we have 22 ports in the Indian Ocean region with whom we have operational turnaround facilities where you don't need a visa or government approval to enter. We just go in there and which is sort of part of that whole system. That's a very major thing that the Navy's done. So by and large, the surveillance capabilities that we have, except the space-based capabilities, which is a big, big gap for us. And that's where, again, Indo-Defense collaboration, particularly for maritime collaboration, becomes significant. So I think that we have a good enough position today, but by 2047, when India becomes the second largest economy in the world, and we still flow around the way that we are going around, then we have a huge challenge on our hand in 15 years from now.
Okay, another question to you, Commodore Samadar. This is from Arjun Iyer. He's a journalism student. What is the likelihood of China entering the Indian Ocean or the Bay of Bengal, particularly? And if that happens, shouldn't India be pursuing denial tactics rather than area dominance?
So, as I said, the chances of the Chinese entering the Indian Ocean is already given. They have been here for many, many years. They have already fished most of us, fish from our areas. They are doing deep sea, sort of, the 90-degree ridge has been fully explored by the Chinese. They have a complete understanding of the underwater domain awareness, which we don't have as much as the Chinese do. So they've been here much longer than we've been in the, let's say, in the South China Sea. That's one. The second thing is, what should be the reason for them to be here? You have to understand that much of their minerals, materials, food, etc., is transiting this area. So in the old days, we used to have convoys, which used to escort our cargoes so that they were not interfered with other let's say, inimical nations. I see if this, as I mentioned to you, the requirements of materials for our country's growth is not going to be found within our own shores. We have to depend externally for it. And if market forces are allowed to continue, that's the best thing to be. But I'm not sure that market forces will dominate the mechanisms for import of crude, import of copper, import of cobalt, import of nickel, all these new technologies and new materials that are required for a high-tech economy. That's going to come. And I think there will be a contest at sea at who gets it. And there might be a contest at land as to who commands it. 40% of global cobalt is with the Chinese today. So I think materials, minerals, markets are going to be the future areas of conflict, apart from all this other stuff that we're seeing. Remember, all of this has a direct linkage with security. Migration is one of the biggest challenges that we are going to have because of water, because of scarcity of materials and access to markets. We'll be fighting for that. And for 2047 is not so far away, given the pace at which we sort of build capabilities in India. If we don't start now, we're going to be way, way behind. So that's my submission to my friend there.
Thank you. Indranil, can I ask you to take this question? It's a little technical, but this is by Ashwani K. Channan. He is the director of Tech 55, which I assume is a technological magazine or website or newspaper. So the question is, a new India-US initiative on critical and emerging technologies was launched by Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden at their recent meeting in Tokyo, in which both sides resolved to expand defense cooperation. Now, will this enable US defense companies, will this help US defense companies to get ITAR, which is the International Traffic in Arms Regulations waivers for technology transfer to India?
Sorry, no, I did.
Okay, I know that is a bit technical. Would anybody else like to take this, Commodore? Go ahead.
I'm not sure that I'm unmuted. Yeah, okay.
You are.
I think, as I think Dr. Banerjee also mentioned earlier, and Dr. Sanjay Baru certainly did, that one of the ways, that the distinct differences between, let's say, the Russian establishment and the US establishment in their structuring of their defense production units is, in one case, it's a state-run unit, and that is what we were for many years. Fortunately, we are now got a hybrid mechanism and efficiencies are creeping in. On the other side, as far as the US is concerned, their entire defense production base is in the private sector. So they are very agile, they're very innovative, and they are building up all the time. But to make sure that their agility and their nimbleness and their, let's say, the intellectual capital is not passed on to other, let us say, not so friendly nations, the ITR regime exists. And that is also a very useful tool to control transfers of platforms and equipment to other countries. In one case in India, a particular provision would not permit a certain airframe manufacturer to sell to India to protect the American business. So, those are sort of things that the ITR can do. I don't know whether we can negotiate something out of that and build it. But as I said, if we are looking at co-design, co-development, co-production of various facilities in the Quad, and the US has done that. For the F-35 is now produced in 8 different countries. In the European Union, the FREM frigate is built in 4 different countries. So there's no case to see how we can work around it if you want to.
Okay. To you, Indranil, a question.
Jyoti, can I just come in 1 minute?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think we should not run away with this. Nobody does technology transfer free, right? The whole intellectual property regime has been put in place precisely to prevent that. I mean, look at the whole issue on COVID vaccine. Even today, I read an article defending the whole IPR thing in COVID vaccine. They're not willing to part with COVID vaccine technology to save human lives. Who is going to part with strategic technologies? So, this illusion that somehow technology transfer will happen, unless you make in India and then we find out how they are making and copy, which is what the Chinese did. I don't see any technology transfer happening unless it is kind of off the shelf, 3rd generation, 4th generation technology. Latest technology will never be available.
Indranil, do you have a comment on that? In which case, what is the India-US defense partnership all about? And does this mean that that the US is afraid of Atmanirbharta?
Well, I think that every country is right in protecting its intellectual property because, after all, millions and billions are spent into research and development.
Right.
So there will be a reluctance to part with, cutting-edge technology. And also, there's a question of your defense forces. You would like your forces to have the best technology and give the one a little below the cutting-edge stuff to others. And there is no other way but to become self-sufficient in these technologies. But even incremental, if you get technologies, little things, they go a long way in helping. Because see, even in an aircraft, there are thousands of technologies involved, and all of it is not required to be cutting edge. And and if you get this kind of help, it makes for really fast development. I remember in the 1990s, when late 1990s. The Chinese were buying all kinds of stuff from the United States, and it was not as if the best aircraft engine technology was going to the Chinese Air Force, but they were getting little technologies. Like I remember they got one thing which helped them to fly planes with greater payloads. Now that changed the strategic equation in Tibet, because now they could fly their aircraft from those high altitude bases with greater payloads, and that changed a lot of things. So, even the incremental technologies that we can gain from this partnership would be of immense help to India.
Okay. Sanjay, Dr. Baru can't hear you.
Sorry, but that's the question I asked. Give me one example. 20 years, 2005, we signed Defense Cooperation Agreement. Give me some examples of what actually technology has been transferred. Let's not talk about the future. What is being transferred? I think this CUTS program should put on the table, should list out the technologies that we have actually got and say, this is what cooperation is about. And then I would be happy. Look, I am not a skeptic of the Indo-US relationship. I've been part of the process. Jyoti Malhotra knows I sold the nuclear deal for 5 years. I mean, I've been very, very strong advocate of this relationship. But as an Indian, I want access to technology. And so the question I'm asking is, what are these technologies that we are going to get? What are these technologies that we have got? That is what research should do. Not just talk about, oh, this can be done, that can be done, this will happen, that will happen. Forget the future. Look at what has been done. And then we'll understand the scope of this relationship.
I think the US consulate, and Adrian, you're here listening carefully, perhaps the US consulate and and CUTS International can come together to give us this information. I think this would be really good, and it would add to our knowledge, certainly to the knowledge of those in this chat room. Yes, yes, go ahead, Commodore.
You know, when we talk about technology, we forget the continuum. It starts with science, which is a statement of principles, and from there you move to engineering, from there you move to technology, and then for product. So you cannot get to technology till you have mastered science and engineering, and we have got a long way to go till we get science and engineering in place before we can absorb the technology, and from that technology make the product. Having said that, again, I am not espousing some great cause of US companies in India. There's much more they can do in India, certainly. But some numbers are good. The Boeing has 5,000 engineers in India, and I think that's going wrapped up. Every C-130J that flies in the world has the center wing made in India. Every Apache aircraft that flies in the world has the fuselage, which is made in India. Every Chinook that flies in the world has the aft pylon and the ramp made in India. These are not easy stuff to make. They're very complex aerostructures, and I think in the future we'll have a larger number of these systems that will go into it. They are not some easy things to do. Making a fuselage, making the center wing of the C-130J in a Tata facility is not easy, but we are doing that. So there has been a technology transfer, but go along with what Dr. Baru has said. What next? You know, we can't be just making some wings and some pylons and all of that. We need to make the whole platform. And as I said, to make that platform, three things are important from a business perspective: size, scope, scale. So if you can offer that, we'll get all of that. But I think whilst I agree with a lot of this Atmanirbhar requirement, but as I said, we have to be careful how we calibrate our Atmanirbhar realization campaign. It's not a button that you switch on at 1900 and by 0001 you're Atmanirbhar. So
Right.
in that process, we have to be careful because the way that we are going around is, in my view, not the understanding that our Prime Minister has communicated. You know, this might make us more nirbal than nirbhar, Atmanirbhar. So, you know, you can't now say make four washers, you make these 2 nuts, give me the whole material specs. You know, you can't do it like that. So we have to be very careful. How do we actually walk the path of being Atmanirbharta without becoming nirbal in the bargain? So we have to be a little careful on that.
Okay, so 2 last questions. One by Mr. Pradeep Mehta, who's the Secretary General of CUTS International, and I'm going to read that out. It was in the open chat box. Should joint ventures not look at exports as a dimension which can matter? It is, of course, subject to strategic clearances. Would anybody like to take that question? Dr. Baru, Indraneel?
Dr. Baru?
Or Indraneel, one of you?
Exports to whom?
So should joint ventures not look at exports, I think, to third countries, right?
Exactly.
As well as to the US.
Exactly. And the whole US economic program from Trump to Biden has been about creating jobs in the US. And we expect them to transfer jobs to Indians.
So is that a fundamental contradiction? Is that... No, but one second, Dr. Baru, 1 second. India wants to create jobs. The US wants to create jobs. Every country wants to create jobs for its own people. So how does a partnership between India and the US, how can it work for both countries? I think that's the point, isn't it?
But that's at the core of Atmanirbharta. Sujit is correct that US wants to sell to India and we want them to manufacture in India. But if US manufactures in India, there are jobs created in India, but jobs lost in the US.
But you can do both countries. You can sell and you can manufacture. Transfer of technology with it's like what you did with the Russians earlier, what you're doing with the French now.
You take just one pistol. A pistol manufactured in the US creates jobs in the US. A pistol manufactured in India by a US company creates jobs in India. What is the whole problem between China and the US? The fact is that American multinationals transferred jobs out of the US to China and manufactured for the rest of the world market out of China. And that is the jobs crisis in the US, which Donald Trump rode on that. And today President Biden continues to ride on that. They're dedicated to creating jobs in America, which is quite understandable.
No, can I just say one thing, Dr. Balu?
Even the statement on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework says very clearly that this will not hurt jobs in the US. The US is worried about jobs for American workers. We are worried about jobs for Indian workers. So
Right.
what is this? That is precisely the issue I'm raising.
No, I think if you don't mind, can I just say this, that when if China is becoming, as Indranil very eloquently described it, as enemy number one for the US, then some of those American industries, both in sensitive and sensitive areas, could perhaps be relocated to India. So India must also be open to this diversification and to this relocation. Indranil, you have a point. You have a comment.
Yeah, you see, it's very simple. In foreign trade, why do countries do foreign trade? And why does foreign trade increase the overall wealth of countries? That's because if your overall production is increasing, say from 10, you are manufacturing 10 and you're employing 10 people at home. Now you do foreign trade, and instead of making 10 units, you make 20 units. And say the next 20 units are made in another country. Now that doesn't affect the employment in your country. I'm just talking about it in a theoretical framework.
Absolutely. Commodore Sujit, you have a comment?
Yes, I think, to come back to this joint venture thing, it's very important that a joint venture succeeds when there are three basic things met from a business perspective. You must be in a predictable environment. The whole thing should be credible, and whatever laws are there, it must be stable. We can't have a changing law. We change the tax law today, we change some other law tomorrow, we change FDI day after tomorrow. This is not exportable, that is not exportable. I'm not talking about India, about any country in the world. That is the first part. The second part, from a pure business point of view, because you need to do sustainable investments, and to make sustainable investments, the policy environment has to be on these three principles of being predictable, credible, and stable. That's the first point. And as far as what Dr. Banerjee has said and pointed out is very correct. The whole idea is about scale, scope, and size. I mean, if the US is making only 20 F-35s a year, and tomorrow we tell them, look, let's start making 50 F-35s in a year. You give us a FACO here, you do some production there, we do some production here. So this, as Dr. Baru also said, that we need to strike a bargain which is win-win-win. It just cannot be a one-sided bargain. Okay, here it is, and now all jobs in US gone. Okay, here it is, all jobs in the Indian side are gone. There will be some balance in that, and I'm sure we can strike that balance in many of the businesses that we want to enter into.
Okay, so one quick last question, and then we'll wrap up. This is from Ankit Kumar, who's the editor of Indian Aerospace Defense News. So the question is that even when Imran Khan was the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the US allowed the export of gas turbines for combat ships to Pakistan, as well as hundreds of M113s, MRAP vehicles, small arms, thousands of TOW, ATGMs, etc., etc. Now, the question is, will at least some of this be used against India, and how this will potentially affect India-US cooperation? Anybody wants to take this? Indranil?
I mean, the answer is pretty well known.
Which is? What's the answer?
It's going to be, if at all there is hostilities, they'd use whatever they have, including some of the junk that they got from Afghanistan. And we know that some of the small arms from Afghanistan are showing up in Kashmir. So that has always been a concern. But
it's not all junk, surely. I mean, some of the stuff the Americans left behind in Afghanistan was pretty sophisticated weaponry.
Yeah, some of it was. But I'm not aware of what state they were in.
Okay. Commodore, you have a quick last comment?
Yes. I'm saying, frankly, it doesn't matter. As long as the kind of equipment that you're given it to them, there's also a huge amount of technical expertise required to operate that, and a deep understanding of the strategic manner in which you exploit it. So, if they give some pistols here and some other thing, good luck to them. I'm sure. As Dr. Baru very clearly said, if India today thinks that Pakistan is a threat, we are just underselling ourselves. Pakistan is not a threat. If we want to sort them out, we can sort them out in various ways. And the best way would be to solve it politically. If there's a national will, we can do it. If we want to solve it militarily, we can solve it militarily. But it's a matter of will. But to say that Pakistan is a threat and all the things that we are doing in our country is only oriented to save us from the Pakistanis, then I don't think that is the right thing for India to do at this stage of our, let's say, progress.
I think that's absolutely very well said. And, Pakistan is not the center of this story or even on the margins. I think the story has moved on elsewhere in the Indo-Pacific. And actually, I would say from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean. Mr. Mehta, do you have a last comment to make? And then I'm going to wrap this up.
There was this very interesting discussion on jobs, etc., etc. Sanjay, it's not a sort of lose-win game. It's not, everybody will lose. People do gain, and this has been very lucidly responded to by the panelists here. So I'll leave it at that, except to say that you need to move on. As far as Pakistan is concerned, I think the points made by Commodore Samaldar are quite valid, except to say that as it is, Pakistan is imploding at the moment. So you don't really have to bother about any external action. Lastly, all countries, one must understand in geopolitics, and as Sanjay would also bear with me, are quite self-interested. They look out for their own interest, and in that kind of situation, how do we manage our own interest is very crucial. And Indranil had very clearly expounded the kind of situation where India now is in, and Jaishankar spoke about it very, very volubly, I would say, and put everything at rest. So I'll leave it at that, and I'd like to also thank everybody.
So all of you will agree that this has been, oops. So sorry. I'm so sorry.
You didn't tell people to put their mobiles on silent.
I assume that they would be, and mine is on silent, but because it's connected to my laptop, it just sort of comes on. It has a life of its own, a mind of its own. But apologies for that. I think we will all agree, ladies and gentlemen, I can't see any other ladies on my screen, but I'm sure there's several of you fellow journalists in the adjacent virtual hall, that this has been a fascinating discussion, an opening workshop and stories of India-US partnership in the defense arena. I think it's been wonderful to have all of you here to talk about not just the highs, but also several questions that we all have. And I would like to thank each of you, Dr. Sanjay Baru, Commodore Sujit Samadar, and Indranil Banerjee, for sharing your perspectives. And I think Dr. Baru, who asks all the right questions, or shall we say all the wrong questions, because he's been on both sides of the divide, both as a journalist and also as a media advisor in the heart of the Manmohan Singh government, where he was very much part of taking the partnership forward between India and the US. Commodore Samadar, you've been, again, in your own way, oh my God. Okay. Commodore Samadar, in your own way, you have contributed immensely to the India-US partnership. And Indranil Banerjee, thank you. I don't know what's wrong with these guys. And Indranil Banerjee, to you for your very sharp and perceptive analysis. Adrian, to you, thank you so much for joining, albeit a little bit late. And I'd like to thank both you and CUTS International for this interaction, for this webinar, and for the series of workshops. So this is the first of several, and I hope that all of you in the virtual hall, my fellow journalists, and more will join in the workshops to come. So thank you all, and thank you all for, particularly to all my speakers. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you.
Thank you.